Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio program. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. This hour is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, and we're going to be talking about energy transportation, pipelines. We're going to be talking about natural gas flaring, landowner issues, coal. If it has anything to do with energy, we're going to be talking about it in the next hour. And we have with us this evening, we have Justin Kringstead, who is the director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We have Representative David Skip Druvdahl. He's a Republican from Arnegard in northwestern North Dakota. And his district extends from just outside of Williston, just south of Williston, all the way to the South Dakota border. It's bigger than a fair number of states in this great country of ours. We also have with us Senator Jessica Unruh, who is a Republican from Beulah. She is serving her first legislative session. She succeeded Senator Randy Christman when Senator Christman was elected to the North Dakota Public Service Commission, and her district includes part of North Dakota's coal country. And we're going to be discussing energy issues in general. First of all, Mr. Kringstead, the pipeline, everyone's talking about pipelines as a way to get trucks off the road, get energy into, get gas into pipelines, get oil into pipelines, so that we don't have to have trucks hauling it around. And how are we progressing as far as that goal is concerned?
Well, there's a couple different, you got to separate out our crude oil challenges and our natural gas challenges. And so from a crude oil perspective, we've been doing quite well. We are still short on pipeline capacity numerically, but where we've really come through is the new rail facilities we've been able to construct in western North Dakota. We actually have now 68% of our crude oil being moved by rail car, which is phenomenal. Several years ago, no one would have ever expected the type of growth we've seen on that front. So we have been able to move all of our crude oil to markets, either within the region or now reaching all the way to the East Coast, the West Coast, the Gulf Coast. And so this rail transportation has opened up a whole lot of new markets for us. So on the crude oil front, we're doing quite well on a larger scale. We still have a lot of work to do yet on the crude oil trucking. How do we gather that crude oil from the well site to one of these pipeline or rail facilities? We're still about 36% of our oil being moved by pipeline and the remainder being moved by truck. So there's a lot of growth yet to happen to get as many trucks off the road, minimize the amount of traffic we have out there.
How many rail loading depots do we have to ship oil in North Dakota?
There's currently 22 facilities that are capable of loading crude oil. If you want to look at it from a unit train, which is around 100 tank cars, or about 8 or 9 loaded unit trains leaving the state every day. So folks that live alongside or travel by the rail facility or rail lines here in North Dakota, you've probably noticed a lot of those black tank cars coming through. Like I said, 800 to 900 loaded leaving. You got that many coming back every day. So it's quite the traffic that we've seen.
How much more expensive is it to ship by rail than to ship by pipeline?
It is more expensive. Pipeline is still the most economic solution. However, rail, they're able to get to these premium markets, again, on that East Coast, West Coast, where they'll offset the higher transportation costs by having a higher market price at those destinations. So it may be $3 to $5 more expensive by rail car, but like I said, you're going to a market that's maybe $12, $15 higher than any of the pipeline markets.
Is the availability of rail shipment deterring pipeline expansion?
It has been, to be honest. We've seen a couple projects be pulled off the table here in the last year or so. The challenge is trying to figure out what the markets around the North American continent are going to look like 3 to 5 years from now. Folks are hesitant to commit to any one given destination or one given market because things have just been so up in the air here these last several years, and so it's been difficult for the pipeline companies to put together commitments.
Representative Druvdahl, one of the consequences of greater oil production has been greater natural gas production, and a lot of this natural gas, roughly a third of it or more, is being flared. And can you tell us why that happens and what we can do to prevent it and what the legislature is doing to try to lessen flaring?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Dale. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the oil issues, including some of the problems we have. Flaring is, as you pointed out, is about 30% of our natural gas is currently being flared. There's several reasons. That one is that we need to get the pipelines into place to the wells, and the wells are being drilled all over the country, all over the western part of the state, and it takes a little time to run those pipelines in there, especially in the winter. The second problem is processing. And they're building processing plants left and right out there, and rather large processing plants, so that when they get the well completed, they get the natural gas in the pipe, then they can get it processed. Then the third problem kicks in is the market. We have to get that gas. It can't just sit there. It has to get out to the market. And, of course, we're sparsely populated, and we're not the market for it. So we have to have those lines going out of the country to the marketplace. And that's all being done. When I sit at home and watch the gas flaring that goes on around my farm, and I'm kind of right in the middle of the heart of the development right now, I see up to 7, 8 wells out of one looking out of my living room window. But what I notice is that they change. This one is flaring a little bit, and then pretty soon this one is flaring a little bit, and then pretty soon this one is not flaring at all anymore, and then there's a new one over here flaring, and then this one goes out and there's a new one over there. So we may be doing 30%, but it's 30% different wells all the time because of the rotating of the field, of the expanding of the field, or the developing of the field.
It sounds better than television.
It does, yeah. Yeah, I don't need nightlights most of the time anyway for a while, but we're concerned about it because it is a waste of natural gas, of a resource, a natural resource. A lot of people, of course, think they're doing it intentionally, and they need to get some pressure off to get this oil out. But you have to remember that's also a resource for that developer. That's money that he's burning up that he could sell too. So it's not that he really wants it, I don't believe. It's just for those other three factors. The Senate or the House passed out a bill earlier to give a tax break, give the 6.5% excise tax to any well that they'll go in and they'll compress the gas and haul it off to a location, or if they use it for electric generator, we'll allow them to have that 6.5% tax until they get a line ran into that site and can ship it out. Then they lose the exemption. The exemption is only for 2 years, so they have 2 years to get that line into place, and then they'll lose that exemption. And I think what we're finding, and most of the time they're getting those wells hooked up to the pipeline. There's always an exception. If a well that's way out of the way and it costs a lot of money and isn't that big a producer, the Industrial Commission is going to give that exemption. Currently, they can have exemption up to a year. And some people tell me about Texas who allow zero flaring. Well, when I looked into that, that's not quite true. They do allow some flaring for 10 days, and then they have exceptions up to, I think it's couple of months anyway, that they give exemptions. But the other difference between us and Texas is Texas is an old field, and they only have to run a line maybe a couple 100 yards to a new well. We might have to run a line 15 miles to a new well at a time. So you can't really compare one state to another because of the age of the fields and that. But it is something we're concerned about. We want to capture that natural gas as fast as we can and all the other gas that's in there and get them refined and get them out to market. It's good for the developers, it's good for the royalty owners, and it's good for the state of North Dakota.
What is being done, if anything, to try to encourage the development of more markets for using natural gas in North Dakota, say for putting vehicles on it or something of that nature? We did.
That's a good question, and I wish I could remember all the answer to it, but we did pass a bill to help out on the natural gas in trucks, if for burning natural gas in trucks, to give a break for the consumption of that. And I don't remember the exact details of it, but that is to encourage the use in the state of North Dakota. And that's something I think even the federal government is encouraging, is the use of natural gas in vehicles, and that's something we're going to continue to push in North Dakota.
Dale, we've also passed a study regarding natural gas and having our legislative management study the use of natural gas within the state of North Dakota to see if we can find a way to utilize this gas that's coming off of these wells instead of flaring them. So,
Senator Unruh, what is the legislature doing with coal in particular this session? Is there anything going on?
There really aren't very many coal-related bills. There are a lot of energy-related bills, and I think the coal industry, the coal industry is affected by a lot of these things that are going on, and we're watching things very closely, watching all the landowner relations bills and how that might affect us throughout the process. But I feel like the coal industry has been around for a few years, and we've got a lot of our processes in place, and all of our legislative type negotiations have taken place previously. So I think we're sitting well right now, and there really isn't a whole lot going on for us at this time.
Could you describe your district, the area that you represent?
Yes, I represent District 33, which is most of Mercer County, which includes Beulah and Hazen, and then parts of Oliver, or all of Oliver, and parts of Morton County. So we extend all the way from Lake Sakakawea up to Mandan. The refinery in Mandan is actually in my district. So we also go south of the interstate a little bit. So it's most of coal country. Almost every coal mine in the state is in my district, and then many of the power plants are as well. And
what does this do in terms of your what you do to prepare to represent your constituents, the fact that you have all of this energy in your district?
Well, I do work for North American Coal Corporation as an environmental specialist, so I have some industry perspective, and that I feel has really allowed me to be able to represent the industry as best as anyone can from our district. It's an important economic piece to our district, and I think that those needs definitely need to be represented here. But I also grew up on a farm and ranch and in a small town north of Dodge, so I feel like I can bring that perspective to which represents, I think, the other half of my district as well. So we have a lot of farmers and ranchers, and then also a lot of industry. So I feel like I'm very well-rounded as far as representing the people that live in my district.
Could you tell us what you do in your job?
I can. As an environmental specialist for a coal mine, most of what I do is prepare our mining permits, which are presented to the North Dakota Public Service Commission for approval for us to mine. So in those permits, we take inventory of the land beforehand, which is where the environmental work comes in. We also lay out different, our mine plan and all of our processes that we're going to be taking throughout the mining process. And then after that's all completed and the mining has been completed, we also have to have plans in that mining permit to put things back together once we're all finished. So I help compiling all of that information for our permits, and then once we have everything put back together, I'm in charge of managing the land properly to make sure that we meet the Public Service Commission standards that are set, to make sure that our land goes back into productivity and is just as productive or more productive than it was before we started. We actually have more stringent regulations here in the state of North Dakota than they have on the federal level. So we're just one step above what a lot of other states are required to do, and that's where my work comes in, is at the end. I'm working with the farmers and ranchers, trying to manage the land appropriately to get the right productivity that we need on it.
How long have you had your job?
I've been working for Coteau Properties for a total of about 8 years for full-time. In full-time, I worked there as an intern in college and as tour guide for about a year, and I've been an environmental specialist for about 7 years.
What's your academic background?
I went to North Dakota State University and got a Bachelor of Science degree in Natural Resources Management and also in Economics.
Okay. Representative Drovdahl, I want you to describe your district as well, since it's so massive.
It's 9,000 square miles. It's bigger. It's just about twice as big as the next size district in the state of North Dakota, and I think we're larger than 3 other states in the United States. It's basically the number one tourist attraction in the state of North Dakota with Medora. It's got 1 million acres of federal grassland, so we have a lot of cattle, horse, cowboys. We're I don't think we're quite the number one oil producer yet, but we have been in the oil producing business since the 50s. When the first oil boom hit, we had it in the north part of the McKenzie County. We're also all the way down to Adams County. So we cover a lot of agriculture, a lot of small towns, a lot of the old Norwegian, Russian, German people. And just a lot of good people out there, or not a lot of people, but good people what we have in the area.
What are the challenges that are represented by having to represent such a large and sparsely populated district?
The biggest challenge is probably getting to know the leadership throughout that district in all the small towns. communities are quite a bit the same. We're agriculture background. Bowman is big in oil, and Slope and Golden Valley and Billings and McKenzie County and Dunn County, which we do have a third of, are all big in oil and agriculture and farming and that. So that's kind of common amongst, and that helps us. The big thing is to get to know everybody and be able to go to all the meetings that they want us to go to represent them, so we know them name personally.
What is the just to shift gears for a moment? What is your impression of the progress that's been made in the legislature in terms of allowing the oil-producing local governments to keep some of the oil taxation to deal with the impacts of oil production and exploration?
Well, when I watched the election this last cycle, and I wasn't up, but I did watch all of the representatives and senators are up, and the main theme that most of them have was that they were going to help with the infrastructure needs, and they were talking about Western North Dakota. So I felt really good coming in. The representatives and senators from Western North Dakota in the 17 oil-producing counties got together all summer and put together a package that we felt would assist the oil-producing counties. According to my elected officials, it's not enough, but they were happy that it would be a good start for the next number of years. And when we brought that to the House in 1358, we've got a very positive reception both in the Finance and Tax, in the Appropriations, and on the floor of the House. I think we had 8 votes against it on the floor of the House. We sent it over to the Senate. It got beat up pretty bad in the Senate. We don't know exactly why. To me, it's kind of standard. We have this little fight towards the end of the session. It goes into conference committee. I'm feeling fairly good that we're going to be able to restore some of that stuff. But I think mainly what the Senate wants to do is have us explain why we put those things in there, why they're needed, why they're affected, why the impact is affecting them, such as our hospitals, such as our emergency services, fire and ambulance services, and of course roads is no problem. We can just tell them drive out there, and they'll figure out why we have to completely replace our roads every year. But I'm still feeling pretty good that we're going to get the support we need in Western North Dakota. We're very low on our percentage of dollars coming back. For instance, I think if you look at the overall dollars, 11.5%, we're getting about 14%. Most states give around 34%. Really, we claim the 5% because that really is the in lieu of dollars. We're getting about 30% of that. But for instance, the coal, which has been around a long time and has been a great industry for all of North Dakota, they're getting about 34% back in those counties. Now we have a bill coming over that they just amended to give 50% of all the tax back to the 3 affiliated tribes. Well, my question is, if we give 50% back to 3 affiliated tribes, why are we treating the non-whites any different? Shouldn't we be giving them 50%, which of course we won't get, but it's a good question to ask the sponsors. But I'm still feeling positive about what we're going to get back.
Where does that bill stand presently in terms of how much money goes back to local governments? It took a substantial change.
It took about $400 million cut. I think it's right around $600 million now, $650 in that area.
And what are you doing to try to restore this?
Well, of course, we're talking to the senators as fast as we can, but we have to let it go through the process. Right now, it had a hearing this afternoon in the appropriations, so we're hoping that they'll be able to restore some. We have to let the senators do their work, and when that gets done, then we'll get talking about restoring it. But we do our work on their bills, they do their work on our bills, and then that's what the conference committee is, and we'll put it together like we always have.
Mr. Kringstad, could you explain what has been done in the last several years to try to expand the pipeline shipping capacity for oil and gas?
Yeah, the first thing we need to understand is where we're headed with our production level, and that has been changing so quickly over the last several years. If you would have asked me 5 years ago when I took the job and did my first oil forecast, I was frightened to tell the legislators that I thought oil production was going to hit 350,000 barrels a day. That at that time, that seemed like a high, incredibly high forecast. And so every year, almost every quarter, we're upping our forecast. So the first thing is understanding where future production is going to be. And we've started to narrow in on a range somewhere around that 1.3 to 1.5 million barrels a day coming from the U.S. Williston Basin. We do include eastern Montana. And so we take this information and then we start working with all the pipeline players, the gas processing players, and we start getting this in the hands of their engineers, their business development teams, and let them get to work working with their customers. And so it's really a challenge of keeping up with technology, what's happening with the producing side, what's happening on the marketing side, and trying to get all that together and put it in the hands of the operators.
Is oil production continuing to grow to the extent that you expected?
We saw that hit here over the wintertime. With the number of wells that we brought online, it was to be expected where the production levels went. It's going to be the next several months are going to be challenging. We've got, again, some winter weather that we're dealing with. We've got load restrictions that'll be coming into effect, and so it might not be till summer again where we see another record month.
Is it particularly challenging for pipeline developers to get permission from landowners to put pipe into their ground?
It is, and it's becoming, Representative Drevdahl could speak to this living out in western North Dakota. Again, just the number of phone calls and knocks on the door that they're receiving because, again, there's just so much activity. In 2011, the most recent data we have, North Dakota, we brought online 2,300 miles of new pipe. That's the distance from Seattle to Washington, D.C., and so you think of that level of activity in that small of an area. There's a lot of landowners affected, and a lot of landowners affected numerous times, and so it does become challenging on that front.
Representative Drevdahl, is this a complaint that you hear quite frequently? Folks being pestered for pipeline easements?
Well, they're getting tired of it. It's been too much. But the one thing I mentioned to my constituents out there is that would you rather have a pipe in the ground where you're not going to have spill, or a truck driving down the highway where we have accidents and tearing up the road? They can take the top dirt off, put the pipe in the ground, and put that dirt back in, and you won't even know it in a year. So it's usually been pretty good, except you're going to get a bad apple every once in a while. I think I had 7 pipelines going across my land last year, and 2 telephone lines, one big line and one regular electrical line. I mean, not telephone, electric. And they all went great until one all of a sudden put some stuff in that wasn't supposed to be there. And there's not a way to go back and get that straightened out. It seems like sometimes you get somebody that isn't quite honest with you up front. And once you get one of those, then you're not willing to work with another pipeline company. But there's concern, but as long as the pipeline company have been up front and honest with them and done their work, it's helped a lot. And in most cases, they have worked with the landowners pretty good, but there's exceptions.
The gentleman you're listening to is Representative David Skip Drevdahl. He's a Republican from Arnegard, North Dakota. We also have with us Senator Jessica Unruh, a Republican from Beulah, represents District 33, North Dakota's coal country. We also have the director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority, Justin Kringstad. We'll be returning in a moment to continue our conversation.
The Legislature Today is brought to you in.
This is Dale Wetzel. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. This is the Legislature Today radio program. This hour is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We have 3 folks here to talk about energy. One of them is Senator Jessica Unruh. She's the Republican from Beulah. We also have Representative Skip Drevdahl. He is a Republican from Arnegard. We also have Mr. Justin Kringstad, who is the director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. And Mr. Kringstad, could you tell us about what is the legislature doing that affects your agency and pipeline development that you think is particularly significant? Yeah,
there's several bills that came in that were affecting the pipeline industry and some of the issues that we deal with. A couple of the big ones we'll deal with actually had to do with the Public Service Commission. This was 1147. This was probably one of the biggest bills affecting the pipeline industry, was how the industry can work with landowners and work through the siting process that they have to deal with in order to get these pipelines put in the ground. And so previously, the existing rules and regulations required pipeline companies to get a corridor approved from the Public Service Commission and then a specific pipeline route approved by the Public Service Commission. And so Bill 1147 would allow for some flexibility for the pipeline companies. Let's say a route has been approved through Farmer Jones's property. The crews are there ready to put the pipe in the ground, and the farmer says, look, I maybe want to put a shop in this area going forward. Is there any way you can deviate just a little bit, just move a little bit to the south and come back around through my property? And the previous rules were very strict and rigid that they would have to go back for a full, several weeks, maybe a month process to get that little deviation. This now allows more flexibility for those pipeline companies to work with those landowners and hopefully encourage stronger relationships when they're out there building those pipelines.
Representative Drovdahl, one of the things that you've been active on in the legislature is oil taxation, specifically the treatment of what are called stripper wells. Could you explain to us what is a stripper well and what sort of tax changes are you supporting on stripper wells?
Well, the stripper wells, as you probably are aware of, came into play way back in the late 50s when the developers of the old vertical wells had put the well in and pumped out a lot of the oil, and it got down to where there was very little oil coming out. The state of North Dakota said, no, we want to make sure we get every drop of oil out of there again, because once you quit pumping, it's lost forever. So that they put into play what they call the stripper well to strip that last bit of oil out of there, and they dropped the 6.5% excise tax so that the well would only have to pay the 5% tax on any production. But not only did they include that in those days, they included all the wells in that spacing, because they were all older wells, and so they all got the same spacing, even though only one had to be judged on its production. For the production, for instance, on a well 10,000 feet or deeper is if the well produces less than 30 barrels a day for 30 consecutive days, it qualifies as a stripper, and all the wells around it in that field would also be called stripper wells. Well, as they go in with these new wells into that old field, they would qualify for the stripper well provision, exemption. So what we were trying to do is say that each well has to be judged on its own production. So to be a stripper well, it would have to be under the 30 barrels. We do recognize that the new wells, the vertical wells, are much more expensive and much higher cost to maintain. So we're raising that 30 barrels to 40 barrels a day in that bill, and that's Bill now 1234 that's in the Senate. We're also putting in that bill, I should go back for just a second and say the fiscal note on that bill was $105 million originally. Raising it to 40 lowers it down somewhat. But we also put a couple other provisions in that bill. First, we put it when we were having trouble getting them to drill in the Bakken Three Forks, we put an incentive into place that would reduce the tax from 6.5% to 2% for the first 18 months of 75,000 barrels. If they'd come in and learn how to do this, the Bakken, well, that is no longer in place unless the prices go down again. But we want to put into that same idea into wells outside the Bakken to get them to go out and start learning the technology to drill outside the Bakken Three Forks area. So that incentive is going to be in that well. But we are leaving all the triggers into place, and a lot of people don't worry about those triggers. They're like $52 or $55. If oil would go down to that price, then the 6.5% would go off on any new wells, especially in the Bakken. For a month, if it went down to that price for 5 months, the 6.5% would go off all wells, which would be billions of dollars to the state. Some of us that have been around and have seen that happen are very concerned about it, but right now those triggers are still into place. The last time it happened, I think we were within 1 day of a tripping in 2009, I believe it was, and the price went up enough, but it would have been disastrous if it had. It's a concern, but it's something that we aren't going to be able, we don't feel we can change right now. We're not giving, at one time we had a tax break of 0.5% tax based on production on it. That's no longer in there. So right now there is also in there where out-of-state royalty owners would have 20% of their royalties withheld for income tax purposes. And of course they would file, and if we took too much, they'd get it back. But right now I think that bill is sitting at about $65 million plus for the state of North Dakota. One of the things that concerns me, and I think a lot of other people, is that when we came down here in January, the state of North Dakota had $1.6 billion, which was a lot of people call surplus, but it was money we didn't expect to get in. Nobody told me to come down here and raise any taxes by $65 million or any other figure. So that's a bother to me, and I hope that we can come out with a neutral bill by the time we're done.
Representative Drovdahl and Senator Unruh, when you're speaking to your constituents at home, what subjects interest them about what the legislature is doing? What do they talk to you about?
Well, I'll go first, and thank you. First of all, there's a number of things. Road actually is probably the number one. As you probably are well aware of, North Dakota, McKenzie County leads the state in traffic fatalities, and it's just basically because we have just so many people out there. We did put in that Super 2. That has helped somewhat, but it's still a major death trap in western North Dakota. We need to get those fixed. We need to get our shoulders fixed. The second thing is money for our county roads and money for our school problems. We're going to have to build at least one more school, maybe two of them out there because of the growth of now that we're getting the production workers to come in with their families. Our schools are starting to take off. We've got to do something about our emergency services. Our volunteers are wore out all through the county, and I think I can find that pretty much all through the district. We need help out there, and that's the number one priority, is getting money back and getting those roads. We can't stall anymore. We can't take 1 or 2 years. It needs to be done right now. The bypasses need to be done. They need to be done right. The 4-lane needs to be done. I understand we're not going to have a divided one, but they're going to put 5 lanes in there, so we're going to have that center turning lane. That's very important. That's where a lot of our accidents are coming in. And we need patrolmen out there to keep the, when we say 65 miles an hour or 55, we need to lower the speed probably, but when we say the speed limit's this, everybody needs to drive it. We need the patrolmen to enforce that out there.
Senator Unruh, what do folks ask you about when you're visiting constituents at home?
Well, I'll have to echo the concerns of Representative Drevdahl's constituents. We've got the same concerns. We're right on the edge of the oil activity, so it's not quite as intense as it is in their district, but we still see a lot of those concerns, a lot of the infrastructure concerns relating to highways and county roads. We need money for our schools. We've got a lot of new students with a lot of special needs, and we need to make sure that we can meet those needs and make sure that we're appropriately funded for that. I also hear the same concerns that people in all of the other districts have as well, relating to property taxes, finding some type of property tax relief and attacking that problem in a way that is appropriate for us to do as a state legislature, but also results in some relief for all of my constituents. And then another hot topic that I've been hearing a lot about is the animal cruelty bill. We've got a lot of farmers and ranchers in my district that are very concerned. They don't want, they want to make sure that they're exempt from any of these restrictions that would be imposed in that bill.
And what are you able to say to them?
Well, when we passed it out of the Senate side, we knew it would get a lot of work done over on the House side. As Representative Drevdahl mentioned before, we kind of do our thing, they do their thing, and we all come together at the end. Right now we're at kind of an interesting crossroads with this bill. I believe the House has done all of their work and sent it back over to the Senate side, and we need to decide if we're going to concur with the changes that they have made or if we need to go to conference committee with this bill. And so right now what I tell my constituents is that it's still a definite work in progress, that there have been some major changes made from when it was over on the Senate side. I'm a lot happier with the bill as it came out of the House. And whether or not we need to concur or we need to take it to conference committee will yet to be decided.
Representative Drevdahl, is the animal cruelty bill something you hear much about in your district?
Not so much from my district, I guess. I have heard a lot about it from not only across the state but across the nation on it. There was a lot of work done in the House. Senator Belter spent a lot of time on a conference committee. The farm groups were much happier with it. They actually supported it when it came out. There was a fear. The farmers and ranchers were scared that they'd start getting charged with animal cruelty from some of the PETA groups. You know, they'd use this as a wedge, and they seem to be much happier with it. But I think the senator hit the nail on the head. We really can't answer a direct question because there's so much fluid going on right now in both the House and the Senate, and until that all plays out. But I think we passed a good piece of legislature out to them, and it may go to conference committee, but I think it'll end up pretty close to what the House passed out.
I wanted to ask both of you, have you heard that much about two particular subjects that deal with roads and motorists? One is the proposed new license plate issue. The other is increased speeding fines. I wanted to know to what extent your constituents are interested in those subjects.
Well, we just passed the increased speeding fines bill that the House had sent over to us last week sometime. And I did actually hear quite a bit from my constituents over the weekend. There weren't very many of them that were happy about us increasing the speeding fines. It's a hefty increase that has been proposed with the Senate version of the bill. And I voted against the bill on the floor. I'm sure it will go to conference committee and kind of get worked out. I knew how my constituents felt about that one. But I think, too, there have been some valid concerns expressed about the safety of our roadways, and we need to make sure that we attack that problem in an appropriate manner as well. So I think we'll be able to come up with some happy agreement between the House and the Senate version once this is all done.
Did you get any idea that your constituents did not support any increase in fines, or just that the approach the Senate favored was too strong?
I believe that the approach that the Senate took on it was just a little bit too strong. I think a reasonable increase in speeding fines would be acceptable by a majority of my constituents, but what we voted on in the Senate was a bit too much.
Representative Drovdahl, how do your constituents cotton to the idea of paying more for speeding?
Well, they're very consistent. If somebody flies by them, they want stiff fines for that person, but they don't want to pay any fines. I think that's kind of normal. When we had that bill, I'm just the opposite. When we had the bill in Transportation Committee, I supported an increase in fines because that's a deterrent. That we set what the safe driving speed is, and we should enforce it. Our fines are so low that they're better off to catch them without a seatbelt than they are to stop them for speeding. $10 fine or something. It doesn't pay for the gas to turn around and stop somebody. And I've had people tell me it's just a joke. I'll give you the money and let me go because it isn't enough to even worry about. So a stiffer fine is there for deterrent. So I supported it, but the House Committee did not, and they actually reduced the fine in the 55-mile-an-hour zone limit, I think it was. They increased one zone and actually lowered the other one. I'm sure it'll go in conference committee, and it'll be a neutral. It'll be somewhere in between the two. But we, even with the increase that the Senate put on, we are still one of the lowest in the area as far as fines on our state and city highways. So we'll have to see that out of conference committee.
What about license plates? Do your constituents have any particular feelings about whether or not we need a new license plate issue?
Haven't heard a word from any constituents in my district whether they want one license or two, if they want the Lewis and Clark, or if they want the old one, or they just don't think that's a big issue. They think we have other issues to really worry about.
I'll have to echo those same words. I haven't heard a word. I would say there are much bigger issues that we're trying to tackle down here.
Mr. Kringstead, in terms of the Pipeline Authority, one of the things that the Pipeline Authority can do is offer financing to folks that want to build pipeline projects. To what extent have companies availed themselves of this ability, and to what extent do you think it is helpful in pipeline network development in North Dakota?
Yeah, at this time, when the Pipeline Authority was created in 2007, we were given the authority of up to $800 million for revenue bonds to be issued by the agency. To date, we have not issued any bonds. With the level of activity that we've seen in western North Dakota, the private financing has been there for all the projects thus far. I think it's a good tool to have going forward. I know that there may be situations coming up. I know longer term when we develop the Bakken, we may be looking at CO2 pipelines or maybe some other type of pipeline projects that financing may have a pretty good use. But to date, we have not used it.
What are the projections in terms of what pipeline capacity is going to be needed in, say, the next 15 to 20 years? I know that you've done some work on this subject, and
right.
What were the conclusions?
Yeah, so right now, my forecast going forward is, again, around that 1.3 to 1.5 million barrels a day of production from this region. So we're going to need a means to move that, whether that's by pipeline or by rail. We have a number of new pipeline projects in the works, nothing up to that 1.3 or 1.5 level to date. So, again, we're continuing to watch the markets, watch the production trends. We have a little bit of time yet to develop the projects that we need by the early 2020s. But again, for the short term, the next 3 to 5 years, we will have a means of moving our oil to market.
From start to finish, how long does it take to develop a pipeline project in North Dakota?
Typically, 3 to 5 years for any sizable project. You've got at least a year up front doing the initial design work, the business development work. You've got the regulatory process in there, and then you've got, again, the pipeline construction process, which could take, a full season or two.
Do you consider that a reasonable time frame, or could it be shortened?
I think it's pretty reasonable the way it is now. I know the pipeline companies that work in multiple states and in different countries, they're quite pleased with the structure we have in North Dakota, the process. It's pretty fair, it's pretty timely. So I have to give credit to the Public Service Commission, they see the importance of these pipeline projects and how vital they are to developing our resource, and so they do work very well to get that done as quickly as possible.
Is there anything that the Pipeline Authority has dealt with in terms of one of the things that has been proposed in recent years are coal-to-liquids projects, making liquid transportation fuels from coal, and is there any demand for pipelines to transport that kind of specialty fuel?
Well, I have not had those discussions to date, but again, any of the energy-related products, whether that if we can create additional diesel supply, additional gasoline supply, the Pipeline Authority would be involved in those type of discussions.
What are the safety records of pipelines in North Dakota? Is it a fairly safe method of transporting liquid fuel?
It is the safest method. When you compare it to trucking or even the rail industry, pipelines are head and shoulders above the others as far as their safety statistics. And so again, the more liquids and natural gas we can get in these pipeline systems, a lot of these issues with the roads, as you heard from our legislators, these are issues that pipelines can solve. And so the quicker we can get this done, the better.
You mentioned that we have 22 rail loading depots that can take oil. Can you tell us how those work?
There's basically two major configurations. You have the unit train facilities, which are the state-of-the-art. You've got large enclosed tunnels where they'll move these trains through the tunnel. They've got loading arms that drop down, and they'll fill with crude oil from large storage tanks. There's pipelines coming into those facilities. And so that's the higher tech, the more modern facilities. All of our new facilities are those unit train style. Some of the original oil was actually as simple as pulling up a semi-truck next to an empty tanker, and they had a little pump on a trailer, and they would just pump it into the rail car. So it can be as simple as that or as complex as the automated loading systems that we see in some of our new ones.
Do we see in the future more of these rail loading facilities being developed?
There may be a few. 22 spread across western North Dakota is quite a few already, but there may be some others that find a strategic location and some customers that we may see a couple more pop up.
Do you think that we're going to, I realize this isn't your bailiwick, but do you think that we might see an expansion of the rail network in North Dakota, like a new spurs or new trackage?
I don't know if we'll see a large number of new miles put in the ground, but as far as upgrades to the existing track, we'll continue to see the investment on that front to continue to make these lines safer for the volume of traffic that they're experiencing.
How much oil can a train carry? Like you mentioned unit trains. How many cars are in a unit train, and how much oil can a unit train carry?
Just a rule of thumb, if you just use 100 tank cars per unit train, then each car around 650 to 700 barrels. So you're looking at close to 70,000 barrels per unit train.
And how much we're producing in North Dakota? Approximately 750,000 barrels per day?
Correct.
And you mentioned there's 68% of the exports, the oil exports in North Dakota, are taking place by rail?
Correct.
Is that something that you see continuing for the longer term?
For the short term, I do. The long term, that's up in the air right now. The industry, that's the big hot button issue. We're trying to figure out, these premium markets that we're experiencing on the coastal areas. Is that going to continue long term, or is that a shorter term blip? And that really will affect how we build out our infrastructure in western North Dakota. That's driving the bus as far as what type of projects we'll see in the next number of years.
The Keystone XL pipeline, which is a project that's been delayed for some time, there is a vision to hook into the Keystone XL pipeline from North Dakota and use it for the shipping of Bakken oil. Do you think that the delay in the Keystone XL project itself has put any sort of damper on those plans?
Well, as far as my understanding, that those plans are still in the works. We actually have the pipe in the ground that could service the Keystone XL pipeline. Those are existing pipelines originating in western North Dakota, eastern Montana that head down to Baker. So those pipes are in the ground ready to transport that crude oil as soon as that pipeline can get constructed.
And how much oil can we use? How much oil can we ship through the Keystone XL pipeline if it is indeed built?
The original construction plans were for 100,000 barrels per day, and that would be batched into that Canadian crude stream heading down towards that Cushing and then the Gulf Coast.
And is this a capacity that's expandable?
They would need to do some facility upgrades, but with the pumps and the tanks that they would be constructing in eastern Montana, 100,000 is the capacity.
I guess just overall, what is your comfort level at the present time with North Dakota's ability to export the oil that it's producing now, and also the prospect of increasing this capacity as our production increases?
Yeah, the big thing, the good news, we will have a means to move our crude oil to market. The challenge going forward is making sure that we have the correct model of moving our crude oil. Again, the prices that dictate the wellhead, or the dynamics in place that affect the wellhead price in West North Dakota are largely driven by the transportation system. And so if we have an inadequately designed or inadequately configured transportation system, that will impact our prices, that will impact tax revenues, mineral owner revenues. And so the challenge going forward is making sure we have the right system, heading to the right destinations at the right time.
Senator Unruh, this is your first session. Tell us what it's been like for you. Are you having fun?
Yes, I am actually having a lot of fun. And it's different, I think, than I expected, but yet all the same. Everything is taken very seriously down here. We have a lot of very serious issues, and it's nice to have so many great experienced senators on board and representatives that have been able to help me out with this whole process. So it has been fun, but we have a lot of serious issues that we handle. So it's a good thing that we can keep it light.
How has it been different? You mentioned it's been different.
It's been different in a couple of different ways. I think I've developed more friendships than I ever anticipated that I would be able to do, and I've been able to learn about a lot more issues than I thought I would be able to handle. So it's just been a really great experience overall.
The woman you've been listening to is Senator Jessica Unruh. She is a Republican senator from Beulah, North Dakota. She's serving in her first session. We also have had with us during the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties Hour, we have had Representative Skip Drubdahl, a Republican from Arnegard and a former Speaker of the House, and also Justin Krinkstead, who is the director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. Again, this hour has been brought to you by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. This is Dale Wetzel, and good evening.